Well, we go from the Greek influence to the Roman influence, and the Roman influence on the New Testament world was the legionnaires being everywhere present brought peace and security. And peace and security multiplies so that in the time of the Apostle Paul, you could actually go down to a boating company and say, hey, I'd like to buy passage to Spain. They go, okay, it'll be this much. And you could go from Britain and Spain to India and into the Arabian Peninsula, all the way up to what we would call the steppes of Russia. And you could be on a Roman road, and you could know the time schedule and the way the Roman roads worked back then, that along the road they had a place to water your horse, every however far you have to go on your horse, and there was a place for you to eat and refresh yourself, and then after a couple of watering holes and a couple of refreshments, you could go to an inn. And they had maps where it would say to go from the watering hole to the refreshing place, is 6 hours, and to go to the next watering hole is 6 hours, and if you want to travel to the inn, it's that far. And that's how advanced the spread of the Roman Empire was. So that when Paul wrote a letter to the Philippians, that letter could go from his prison, wherever he was, either in Rome or in Caesarea, and could go to Philippi. And he knew how long it would take and what road they could go on. And that's how advanced, because the Roman roads were primarily made by the legionnaires as they conquered. So the backdrop for all of these elements of how we got the New Testament, all 27 of our epistles, were written within this Greek language, Greek culture, marketplace in the center, Roman peace and safety, and Roman law kind of world. And that brings metaphors that only you could understand with that. For example, the word for redemption, in whom we have redemption, even the forgiveness of our sins, becomes a word right out of the Roman period. Ex agorazo is what redemption is. And what is ex means out of. What is agora? It's the marketplace. What does ex agorazo mean? You would go to the marketplace to buy a slave. And so redeeming a slave from slavery became the word Jesus picked to describe through the Apostle Paul our redemption. And it all of a sudden takes on a different meaning than redeeming a bottle and getting a dime for it. All of a sudden you're talking about a human that was just an object that was owned by a master that had no rights. And a new master comes and purchases them and liberates them. That's what the gospel says. Our original master was the devil, and he treated us like, we're just nothing. But someone died in our place to pay the price of our redemption, and because of our sins, not because the devil needed to be paid, but to pay the price of righteousness, of God's righteousness, wrath, assuaded by the blood of Christ. And that picture of being bought out of the slave market of sin is something Paul takes from this backdrop, this empire in which we live. And more of that will come when we're talking about the languages. The Roman roads, I already mentioned that. Just a few other Roman things that's really fascinating. This is not a Lego thing. This is Herod's palace. This is an example of what the Greek-Roman world did. King Herod built this thing, this whole bottom here, this long object all the way over to there, and all this is archaeologically kind of reconstructed in a model form of what the palace in Jerusalem. This is where Herod was living when a group of men called the Magi, or we know them as the what? The wise men. They came to the front gate looking for a king. I mean, where would you go but to a palace? This palace had sleeping quarters for 600 people. He could have 600 guests over. I mean, you ever have, a musical team and there's 6 of them? How would you like to have 600? That's how big his palace was. And he had, this is just very lightly done, but according to Josephus, some of the amazing, impressive elements that Herod built into this. But the Magi came here looking for a king. A king lived there. The king wasn't that king. He was a baby, 5 miles south. But this is where they came. But after Herod died, guess who moves in here? Pilate. Wouldn't you pick the biggest house if you're the Roman who ruled the world? And this is the first stop of where Jesus was brought, as he was hastily brought in the middle of the night to see Herod. And to see Pilate. And Pilate says, hey, we'll have to convene. And he moves to his other place, which is just over here. So Jesus probably came here, then was shuttled from here over to where Herod's grandson was, who wanted to see Jesus. So Jesus was brought here from Caiaphas' house over there to this palace, up to Herod, and then he goes on to what's called the Antonian fortress. Another view of it, it's an impressive structure. Here's the Antonian fortress. Again, another Roman influence. This is a model of the place right here where these towers are, where Jesus was tried by Herod, where Herod washed his hands, where the soldiers stripped off his clothes, scourged him, put the crown of thorns on him, and gave him the cross to bear. Now what's interesting is, this is the temple. This is the Holy of Holies right there. Look at that, how close they are. Jesus, who was the God that was being worshipped, or should have been being worshipped there, was rejected and scorned and mocked and scourged, and then he carries his cross from here and down this road, which we call today, all of this today is inside the city, and they call that the Via Dolorosa. By the way, this is where the pool with 5 porches is right there. It's called the Pool of Bethesda, and that's where in chapter 5 of John's Gospel, the man was laying there, and Jesus healed him. And it's also where the sheep were brought in on the day of Passover. This is what it looks like at night, and we're on time. We ran out. So the message of Bible interpretation is that everything in the Bible happened somewhere, and it happened not only in a geographic place, but it happened inside of a culture, which truly, like Wolverines and Spartans, you can understand what those 2 words mean, but if you understand within the time period which it was spoken and the context and the culture, all of a sudden, you don't think of an animal in the woods and a Greek. You think of 2 teams. And that's one of the principles, the principle of New Testament gospel history that helps us understand the Bible.